Hi everybody, welcome along to this very special episode from the Rangers Rabble. If you're joining us live, if you're a member joining us live tonight, Wednesday, welcome along. If you're watching this when it's released on YouTube on Thursday or catching up on it at some later stage, thanks for coming along. Thanks for giving us your time. I'm delighted to say that this is one of our somewhat sporadic author interviews. Most of them have been with one of these two guys that's with me here. Delighted to be joined by Davy Heard and Ian Stewart, who are the co-authors, which is quite an interesting concept I'd like to touch on as well, of this fantastic new book about the late, great Torry Gillick, simply called Torry, which, if you live up in Aberdeen, is actually a part of Aberdeen. It's actually a borough of Aberdeen, but it's nothing to do with that. It's about Torry Gillick. So, Ian, first of all, because we've not had you before, could you give everybody quite a brief summation of the previous books, because I know you've done a couple of books, haven't you, previously?
Yeah, so I've done 3. My first venture was probably more a fanzine than a book, really, was about Helicopter Sunday and supporter stories from Helicopter Sunday. One I feel the need maybe I should revisit and make a better job of, if I'm honest. But the other 2 were Mr. Struth, the Boss, who I co-wrote with David Mason, and the last book was Eye of the Tiger, about the late, great Tiger Show. So that's my background, and I love that kind of era, the Mr. Struth era of Rangers and all that goes along with it. Well,
fantastic. And Davy Heard, welcome back on the Rabble, Davy. We know that this is book number 4 for you, I believe.
Yeah. I think I've been on here all 4 of them, haven't I?
Yes, you have.
Yes.
A brief resume of the other 3.
Okay. My first book was 2022. 1872, which was a series of short biographies of players in the first 75 years of Rangers. My next book was Kings of the League Cup, which was about the 27 times Rangers have won the League Cup up to that point, although there's a new chapter required for that after last season. And my third book was the story of season 77-78, when Rangers won the treble. John Gregg's last season as captain, David Cooper's first season as a player. And now this new venture, my first co-authorship, as you've just called it, of this Torry Gillick biography.
Yeah. Now, Ian just said that he's fascinated by the Mr. Struth era. Your first book sort of touched on that with some of the players that you talked about, but then you were sort of more up to date. So what brought about the book about Torry Gillick, Dave, and also explain a little about how the co-authorship came about, if you could.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of points there. Well, first of all, Torry Gillick was actually one of the short biographies in my first book. So I had already researched his story a little bit for that first book. And even though I'd never written a book about the Struth era as such, it's certainly one that absolutely fascinates me. I'm not quite the expert as the Ian is in that particular time frame, but the players just strip off the tongue, don't they? The Bill Struth, and you could talk about them all night. As regards how I started with this particular book, it all started actually with a film that Rangers TV studios were making about the Iron Curtain team. Ian Sands at Rangers TV invited me along to be interviewed as part of it. I happened to talk about Torry Gillick in it, and it was recorded by RTV. Not that long after that, members of the Gillick family were given a VIP tour of Ibrox, and they were guests of honour at a match against Aberdeen. And Ian happened to mention to them, because they were filming it, they put it in Rangers Twitter and Facebook and stuff like that. When they mentioned to them that I had done this interview and it was going to be part of the film, and when they saw it, they wanted to get in touch with me as a thank you for being part of their papa's film. I got to know them. They started telling me a little snippets about Torry's life away from football, which I'd heard the stuff about his relationship with Bill Struth and stuff like that, but I knew nothing of his background as a family man, if you like. And I thought it was fascinating. And I thought when you add that onto his football career, and you add that onto the whole Rangers of that era, it just seemed like a great book to write. And how did co-authorship come about? When I was starting to research it, Ian and I are members of a Facebook group, an authors page. and we were talking about our next projects, and both of us happened to say we're going to do a Torry Gillick book now. Because obviously this is the era that Ian's most interested in. And it just seemed absolutely natural if we were both going to write a Torry Gillick book that we would join forces and do it together, because it would be the best version it could be if the two of us were working on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as we've done in previous iterations of this version of the podcast, I don't really want to talk too much about the contents of the book, because the whole idea is people are going to go out and buy it. Although while I was reading it, I've taken copious amount of notes of things that absolutely fascinated me, because I was aware of who Torry Gillick was. I'd heard about him, most notably because of what happened in 1945 when he managed to count to 12. But we'll touch on that, because that's something I'm sure it was the Follow stage show that highlighted that. That's when I first heard that. So Ian, how Davies told us how you two got together. The good old social media kind of putting you in touch with doing the same, the same book. How did you decide who was doing what? I mean, did you share the chapters? Did you do specific parts of Torry's career or life or whatever?
So it wouldn't work particularly well if we shared chapters and we did a bit each chapter. So I split the book into sections, as you'll be able to see. And Davey I've actually not met the family, so Dave's had all that personal dealings with the family anecdotes, the things that actually add the real colour to Torry's life and the completeness of him as a person. He's not just a footballer, he's a family man, he's a father, grandfather, papa, and what have you. So David and I early on, David actually started the book. I'd done less practical stuff. I was still in the research mode. So what we decided to do, that I would focus on his time at Everton and also his career during the war years, and Davey would do the other parts, if you like. So that was broadly how we split it up. And that, through the war years, from his time at Everton, covered 7-8 years of his football career. That's actually a bit longer than that. It's about 10 years of his football career. And what we didn't want to do was focus it all on Rangers, because he spent a significant amount of time with Everton and had a big impact at Everton. So we wanted to acknowledge that part of his football career, because, as you'll have seen in the book, he's probably only one of two players who are in the Hall of Fame of both Everton and Rangers, which tells you an awful lot about him as a talent and as a man.
Yep, and he's also the only player that Mr. Struth signed twice, which I also did know before I read the book, but that's obviously pointed out in the book. So basically, to put it simply, having heard what you said there, Ian, and having read the book, I would say basically if you did the sort of Everton bit in the Warriors, if you split the book into three, basically you're the meat in a David Hurt's sandwich, because he'd have done the start and the end, and you sort of did the middle. Would that be fair?
I don't know if it's quite as neat as that, but
it's not as neat and tidy as that, but that would be the sort of sort of basic eras of it.
Yeah. So, and Davey would have done the part post-war. So Davey's probably done this, covered his Rangers career predominantly pre-war and post-war, and the family stuff. Yeah. And it's interesting, as David points out, he's the only man that's won the cup before and after the war with Rangers. It's really interesting, and he straddles a myriad of Rangers legends, and one of probably the only person that does, actually, isn't he, David? He's the only one that really goes from Meiklejohn through to George Young, Willie Woodburn, etc. Yeah,
but he, as you said, right at the very start of his Rangers career, he was playing with guys like Sandy Archibald, and right at the end of it, he was playing with Johnny Hubbard. So it stretches this huge period of time across, you could argue, certainly two of the greatest Rangers eras of them all. The early to mid 30s, and then the post-war years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I noticed, and just delving into some of what was in the book, I didn't realise he left Rangers, David, when he was only a teenager. He was only 19 when he left Rangers to go to Everton, and by certainly by reading the book, he didn't really want to go to Everton.
Well, he knew nothing about it. he didn't know that he was going to be transferred to Everton until basically the two clubs had already basically stitched it up. But he was a double winner of Rangers at 18. He was you could describe him as a kind of shooting star of Scottish football at the time. And it took what was reported as a record transfer fee for both Everton paying it and Rangers receiving it to part with him at the age of 19, and that I think tells you just how big a talent he already was at that age. As I say, he'd won everything. He'd scored against Celtic home and away. He'd ticked just about every box you could probably tick as a Rangers player at 19 anyway. There is a whole story about why Rangers actually decided to sell him, because at that point in time, Rangers were by far not just a bigger club than Everton, but probably a bigger club than just about every team in England. Rangers probably didn't need to sell him at that time, and there's a few theories as to why Mr. Struth decided that he could do without Torry Gillick. In terms of, was it the way he was off the park? Did actually Bill Struth think this was the best thing for a young man that's about to get married? That this is going to earn him a lot of money. It's going to be better for his family life, because this was a big thing for Mr. Struth, was the whole traditional family thing. And then, of course, there was the money itself. Could Rangers turn down an amount of money that big?
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the family thing. I mean, there's a bit in the, in the book that he was, as you say, he was. I mean, back in those days, it wasn't unusual for folk to get married at sort of 18, 19, 20-year-old. And he said to Mr. Struth, I'm going to get married to. I'm quite keen on this girlfriend that I've got, who was the. If I remember right, she was the daughter of the woman he bought his first car of, and he couldn't drive, and she drove the car. And it's that's quite an interesting wee story as well. And Mr. Struth deducted money off his wages every week to pay for the engagement ring.
Exactly, and I think that's one of these things. Bill Struth's got this reputation as this dictator, this iron fist all the time. Bill Struth had a great affinity with his players. He wanted to look after them as well. He called them his boys. And I think Torry Gillick, when you look at all through his Rangers career when he was at Ibrox, yes, they had some run-ins. They disagreed on a few things, but I don't think there's any doubt that Gillick was one of his absolute favourites, and he was somebody that he wanted to look after, both as a player and away from the football field as well. Yeah,
so as we say, Torry went down to Everton when he was only 19, which I think back then was probably a fairly big move. I mean, these days 19-year-olds moving from Glasgow to Merseyside isn't really a big move, but back then I'd imagine it wasn't been the easiest thing to do.
No, and you had to rearrange his wedding as well. Yeah. I mean, perhaps, is this the Rangers trading model that we talk about these days? Is this the early incarnation of it? As David said there, it was maybe too good. The money was too good to turn down, and Rangers had backup, if you like, talented as he was. But Everton couldn't believe their luck when they got him. And he was highlighted, and I think we've quoted in the book, as one of the brightest stars and emerging stars in Scottish football. So for Everton to get him was a real coup. And again, as we describe, Everton were a really struggling team at the time. They were trying to regain greatness, but it was relegation battles they were involved in. And for the first 2.5 years he was there, that was pretty much the case. And in the second full season, got a really bad injury, which kept him out quite significant period of time. But then, of course, in third full season, Everton won the league. And Everton have only won the English top division 9 times. So that team is held in the highest esteem in Merseyside, hence why he's a member of the Everton Hall of Fame. And he had a real pivotal role in that Everton title win. And as I said, you don't get in the Everton Hall of Fame for no reason. There's a book recently been published on that team, and sort of the breakup of the team, which coincided with the war, naturally enough, I guess. But, he's somebody that fascinates Everton historians as well because of his life story and the life outside of football. So that must have been some wrench, actually, at 19, because transport isn't anywhere like, as we know, as effective then as it is now. So that must have been some wrench for him to go way down there. But they settled really well. And it was only in the autumn of 1939 when they had the accident in the garage, and fate, I guess, played a hand there, and he decided eventually to return to Scotland to rehabilitate, which led him back to Ibrox, essentially, although he went to Airdrie as a guest first of all. But it was the path that took him back to Ibrox. And Mr. Struth And that was one of the things actually that pricked my attention with this, and my other research and my other books. Torry Gillick's name comes up a lot, and the fact Mr. Struth is the only player he ever signed twice that we're aware of. And I'm happy for MD to maybe say otherwise or confirm if there's any other player, but we're not aware of any other player he signed twice. That tells you something about him. That gives you a really, really strong message about A, the person, and B, the player that he was.
Yeah, something else that fascinated me, I am going to dip in and out of things I picked out of the book. Something that fascinated me when he went to Everton, he struck up a bit of a partnership with Alex Stevenson, who he played with at Rangers on his debut, but that was the only time he ever played with him at Rangers. So I found that absolutely fascinating, that a guy that was in the Rangers team, he made his debut in, never played with him again in the light blue Rangers, but played with them prolifically at Everton.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny how, 10 degrees of separation or whatever the phrase is, that's how things happen, that fate plays a hand in that. Absolutely.
Yeah,
of course. Stevenson was a bit different for Gillick in that he couldn't get into the Rangers team. he went to Everton simply because he just couldn't force his way into the Rangers team. Even though he was an international class inside forward, he couldn't. In saying that, he played in the same position as Bob McPhail, so you could probably be not surprised that he didn't play too often for Rangers.
Yeah, nice wee segue from me there, Davey. International class. Torry Gillick most certainly was international class. Unfortunately, due to the outbreak of hostilities in 1939, he only got 5 official Scotland caps.
Yeah. Well, that's undoubtedly a timing thing. Well, of course, 1939 international football basically stopped being official, although there was loads of internationals played during the war, and Torry did play 3 more internationals during the war, but there was no official ones after 1939 September, and obviously he had his accident just at that same time as well, so that would have, even if the war hadn't happened, he wouldn't have played international football for all of them. But I think it is fair to say, though, I mean, the war came along when he was 23 years old. The war ended, he was 30-year-old. I mean, 23 to 30, that's probably the peak time for a footballer, both at club and at international level, and he was robbed of it because through the war, as many other players were.
Yeah, I mean, we touched on, go back to just about the time of the outbreak of war. Ian, you touched on it, you both touched on it, that he had in November 1939, he had a bit of an accident at home. He had a fire in his garage,
yeah.
Which, if it wasn't for the quick thinking of his wife, Mr. Gillick might not have been with us any longer than that.
Yeah, it was a really serious one. He needed skin grafts and what have you. And although they were well settled in Merseyside, I think being ill, and there'll be a mental aspect to that as well, and psychological aspect. The thing to do would be return to Scotland, and again, as maybe we'll touch on, he's had a difficult life, and a lot of really, I can't think of the right adjective here, but a lot of real life trials to endure and try and cope with. And I think I said, and we were speaking to someone else, I don't know how he found the strength of character to even get out of bed in the morning sometimes, of what the things he had to try and cope with in life. Must have been awful. Absolutely awful.
Yeah, Davey, as Ian says there, I mean, the book's interspersed with personal tragedies of Torry Gillick's life. I mean, Ian said that when he moved to Everton, he had to change his wedding because he originally had his wedding planned for a day that he didn't play football in Scotland, but he moved to England and he played football. Yeah. Was it on Boxing Day or whatever day it was that they didn't play here?
Christmas Day.
Christmas Day. And they played down there, so he moved it to Hogmanay or thereabouts. And I believe is from the book that his in-laws died very, very quickly either side of the wedding.
Yeah, his wife's parents both passed away, one just before the wedding, one just after the wedding, although the mother had an accident anyway, which meant that she wasn't at the wedding anyway. So, they got off to a starting married life that probably is almost beyond belief how difficult it must have been. And you add to that, there was a transfer going on during that. There was a move from Scotland to England at the same time, and he was still only 19 years old. So it must have been an incredibly stressful time. And a couple of days after the mother died, he played in his first Merseyside derby. What kind of character does it take to have to get through all that stuff, and then you play in the Merseyside derby and you're one of the best players on the pitch? And it's a theme in the book after that, isn't it? Unfortunately, there's tragedies come along at times during his football career, just as the biggest games are coming along, and every time he manages somehow to still be out there in the pitch and still performing. Although I think there was one of them that I think, looking back, he and probably Rangers would also say that he probably shouldn't have taken the pitch on at least one of those occasions.
Yeah, but I mean, I know the occasion you're talking about was when his daughter passed away. I mean, the mental resilience to come out the day after your daughter passed away and said, I want to play. Albeit, by all accounts, it wasn't his best performance. But as you say, he probably shouldn't have. But that's the mark of the man that he didn't want to let his side down, you know. And it's
and I think something that he wrote a book about Tiger Shaw. Right? If you have in your mind what is the typical Bill Struth player, Tiger Shaw must be right up there as close to number one. The club always comes first. Run through brick walls for the team. The club's bigger than the man. All that kind of stuff. Torry Gillick's not got that kind of reputation. He was more as a maverick, an entertainer. He'd done his own thing, rebelled against authority, all that kind of stuff. But yet, you can't argue in situations like that. He still put the club first. He still put the club before anything else. He still was your typical Bill Struth player, but just not the kind that you think of.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that, Davey says that, Torry Gillick was the sort of guy, he rebelled against authority. I mean, there's a famous story that he used to always keep his bowler hat in a carrier bag and put it on walking up towards the stadium because Mr. Struth insisted that Rangers players wore their bowler hat all the time going to and from training. And he didn't seem to like the sort of discipline side of it. That wasn't really his thing. But he was still always referred to by Bill Struth as one of his boys, one of his kind of top lads. It's you wouldn't think that if you just you heard the Torry Gillick story, you wouldn't think, well, Bill Struth was his manager, because it's not the sort of character you'd expect Mr. Struth to put up with.
No, and that again, that was another hook for me in Torry, looking at Torry Gillick and having a Torry Gillick story out there, that opposites attract type thing. And I think, though, as we all know, I think probably most folk will know, Bill Struth was not a football man as such. His background was athletics. But what he could do, he could build a team, and he knew how to delegate. And he also, so man management was his thing, as David's described there. They were his boys, and he looked after them. And in turn, you get the payback where they'll run through a brick wall for him. And he would also recognise you can't have 11 Tiger Shaws. You need to have a mix of characters and a mix to keep that blend of and be a team and have that match winner. And probably even Bill Struth would recognise, and if you look back through the history of football, those supremely talented players maybe had some character flaws. Think of George Best, Maradona. There was elements, but I think secretly Bill Struth, and we know he did, he loved Torry Gillick, and he loved all his players, but he loved him as the man he was. So he didn't want to change him, though he would have to, on the surface, apply the same discipline. But deep, he wouldn't be taking money off his wages to buy an engagement ring if he didn't care about him. And he wouldn't have brought him back twice. So, I think we maybe describe his antithesis in some respects of Bill Struth standards. Actually, it was something Bill Struth would recognise he needed in his team.
Yeah, indeed. Right. As I say, we're live to our members on the Rabbles. I've got a couple of questions in the comments from a couple of those that are actually watching. Thanks for watching in, guys. Ian Thompson, Davey would like to know who took Torry to Everton in the first place. Who was the Everton manager at the time that Torry went away?
Well, Ian's the expert, but Everton didn't have a manager back then. Everton just did a club secretary.
All right, okay.
It was Theo Foley, his name was on it. They were scouted by the secretary was in the stand the Saturday watching him, and they agreed a fee with Rangers by the Monday, and he was transferred on the Monday.
Okay, and Ian, here's an interesting one from Mark Doyle. Was Torry Gillick the John Gregg of his time?
Not quite. It's probably more Tiger Shaw would have been the John Greig of his time. Perhaps he's close, perhaps in terms of ability. Now, he was principally a winger, but he played across all the forward positions. So who would you describe him as? Oh, that's a really good question.
Actually, this might sound like a really strange analogy, but as a winger, I'm not saying he was as good as he was the same kind of player, but his stats are very like Brian Laudrup's. So in that he could play anywhere across the front. He was a strong, pacey winger. Players would bounce off him. He scored a lot of goals, created a lot of goals. But he could play up front as well. And he would move. He could cut inside. He could play inside as well. But as an inside forward in his later years, when he became a scheming inside forward that sort of created more than scored, you're probably talking it was more the kind of Ian McMillan, Jim Baxter type player than the more explosive player that he was when he was younger.
Right, so, Davey, that's something we should possibly touch on. I mean, we know, well, if you know much about Torry Gillick, he knows he was a winger. Back in Torry's time in the kind of the 30s when he started, it was sort of five forwards and everybody else kind of just stood behind him in various different places. So, reading the book, it seemed that he wasn't your archetypical winger. He didn't just stand up. I mean, I don't know the old positions of inside left or outside right and all that. I'm a bit lost with all them, as you two young gentlemen would be as well, I would imagine. But he didn't seem to just hug the touchline all the time. That wasn't really his game. But he did score an awful lot of goals.
Oh yeah, well, he scored more than 200 goals for Rangers. He's the 10th top scorer for Rangers of all time, if you include the war years in it. Remember, I mentioned that was his peak years, 23 to 30. He scored best part of 100 goals during the war. 206 in total. There's only 9 players in Rangers history have scored more goals than him in 152 years, and he's one of the few in the top 10 that wasn't a centre forward most of the time. The vast majority of them, your Jimmy Smith, Bob McPhail's probably the only one that wasn't a centre forward as well. So yeah, but he actually started as a centre forward. He was signed as a centre forward. He played centre forward at junior football. But Rangers had such good centre forwards, and he was so versatile that he got changed into being a winger by the time he had broke into the first team. And he played right wing and left wing. And he played right wing and left wing for Rangers. He played right wing and left wing for Everton. He played right wing and left wing for Scotland. He was highly adaptable, and probably as adaptable as any forward I've ever really read about.
Yeah, I mean, you see, with the juniors. No, I noticed very early in the book he started. He'd half a season at Petershill, and he scored something like 30 goals. What was he, 16 years old? I mean, that's 16, that's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. As you see, he moved to Rangers, couldn't get in because the strikers were the strikers, so he went out in the wing, and the rest, as they say, is history. But we can't, obviously, because you guys, you include the Warriors, which you quite rightly should. The league championships, maybe not so much because it wasn't national leagues. Because I know on another podcast that you did, I've just listened to, you highlighted that fact. And you're probably right that it wasn't national league, so you possibly can't include the league titles, but the cup certainly there was loads of them, and it's any excuse to mention the hat trick he scored in 1943.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that once we researched that particular 8-1 game, Celtic lost the plot on the park. The fans went crazy off the park, so these things didn't change, but. Gillick's hat trick, he scored goals numbers 7 and 8 while he was concussed. He had taken a really bad head knock during the game. Apparently, and if concussion protocols had still existed, there's absolutely no way he would still have been on the park. He remembered virtually nothing of scoring those 2 goals. And the last one was a header as well, which is absolutely bizarre. But yeah, again, that's this whole bit about football was completely different back then. And it very much was.
Yeah, I mean back then, obviously no substitutes. So if you were still able to walk, you really had to do something, even if it was was it, Ian? It was traditionally they said that if you were injured, you couldn't just walk. You basically wandered up and down the left wing to the best of your ability.
That was where you were banished. Yeah, banished to the left wing. And if you also think, Davy's talking there about the header, remember the balls they played by back then as well? Really heavy, and the kit and the shirts. And if you look at some of the footage, and there is a wee bit of footage out there, and folk will look at it and think, what are these guys talking about? The game looks so slow. But bear in mind, the jerseys, the kit, the boots. I don't know how they managed to control the ball with those boots they used to play with, and the pitches as well. Think about what footballers have today, and then compare it with what these guys dealt with. To achieve what they did is phenomenal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, getting back on to speaking about Torry, obviously he came back. As we said, the fire in his garage, November 1939. So he came back up to Scotland, and he originally hailed from just outside Airdrie, and he moved back to the sort of family home, and he guested for Airdrie a little bit. I think that's correct in saying that. Then he kind of guested for Rangers all through the war because you were allowed to do that. And then when hostilities ended in September 1945 or whenever or thereabouts, he came back to Rangers permanently. But I did notice that he played one last game for Everton in a Lancashire Cup final with him and Rangers teammate Jimmy Caskey went down and played in a Lancashire Cup final for Everton, despite the fact they were both on the verge of re-signing for Rangers.
Yeah, they were still registered with Everton at the time, and that would just be as a signing off, so to speak, before formally signing for Rangers. The negotiations for that went on for quite some time, and there was a point where Jimmy Caskey looked like he might have gone to Hibs, but both eventually ended up back at Rangers. But yeah, I think there maybe be a sense of obligation in Torry's part to turn out for Everton, maybe as a last hurrah, so to speak, because you get the impression that he was somebody that took those kind of things really seriously, and it mattered. And Everton mattered to him as well, perhaps not as much as Rangers, but he did until obviously the accident, he did a happy time down south, made a lot of friends that he continued to have in his later years, even after he retired. So Everton was a special part of his life.
Yeah, and then Davey, he came back up to Rangers after the war, and he played on a few more years, and he was part of the Moscow Dynamo game that we mentioned in 1945, and he was the one that
he found there was 12 Russians playing against them. Yeah,
there's 12 players on the park because they allowed. This is almost mystified me about that game that they allowed substitutes. I didn't think substitutes were even something that we thought of back in 1945.
I think the occasional glamour friendly must have allowed them, but the Russians went 2 up quite early on. They looked as if they were going to run over the top of Rangers. Rangers fought back and then started to get the upper hand, pulled one back before half time. By the time the second half was in, the Russians were basically hanging on for grim death, and they obviously decided to try to see if anybody would notice that they put someone on without taking somebody off. And it was Torry noticed that he was getting a bit more cramped than he should have been. Counted the number of legs on the pitch and decided there's something not quite right here. Told the referee to get the game stopped, and sure enough, one of the Russians had to go off.
I love the quote in the book when he was asked, how did you realise? And as you say, he said, my space was a bit more cramped, and I can count to 12. I thought that was quite good. But Ian, I also noticed what to me is an incredible stat that he scored Rangers' last goal in 1946 and their first goal and last goal in 1947. That's probably something that will never ever be done again. Obviously not for those years, but scoring the last goal of one year and then the first goal and the last goal of the next year. I think that's an incredible stat.
It is, and actually through his career, there's a lot of things like that. The first goal in the League Cup final, for example, the first. David, correct me if I'm wrong here, but he was the first. I'm sure this is correct. He's the first player to wear the number 8 shirt for Rangers in a competitive game. Yep, he certainly was, and he scored in it. Yeah, when the numbers were introduced. Scores winning goal in a cup final. First and last goals were against Celtic. All these things. It's the symmetry of these things is remarkable, and it's you just wonder. It's fate. And you have to be talented to achieve those things and do those things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then obviously his Rangers career ended, am I right in saying 1948 48, 49 thereabouts. I think
Well, he actually never left Rangers 1950, but he didn't really play much in the 50s at all. His last game was actually a Charity Cup final against Celtic, where there was a Hollywood star in the crowd, and Celtic went 3-0 up, and then Gillick inspired a comeback, scored one, made one, but we just ran out of steam at the end and we lost 3-2.
Yeah, I never took a note of that because I don't like talking to Rangers. But yeah, so obviously then he was obviously still back up in Scotland, and he was he set about he had a scrap metal business.
Yeah,
Hodge business. Yeah, sorry, Ian.
No, on you go, David. It's okay.
I say yeah, he had set up a haulage business. He dabbled in one or two different things before he kind of settled, and basically that has been his main job, if you like. He'd set up that haulage business anyway, but he wrote a column in a newspaper for a while. He ran a pub for a while, but that never really suited him. But his haulage business was very successful. They got a lot of scrap from Dunray, which I think that must be up near where you, somewhere up where you are, Wilf, isn't it?
It's even further north than me. That's right up the very
top.
Yeah,
they got lots of scrap for there. So yeah, he ran that business basically till 1971 when he died.
Yeah, and touching on that, he died on the same day as another Rangers great, who was obviously slightly older than him at the time. Mr. Morton was 78 when he died, but the same days. Another piece of symmetry, I feel like.
Again, absolutely. And there was a really poignant tribute in the Rangers news following that from Willie Waddle for Torry Gillick, which showed again, Willie Waddle obviously was Rangers manager at that time, but even still, for somebody of the stature of Willie Waddle, posting such a personal and heartfelt tribute was really touching, and showed you the esteem in which Torry was held by his colleagues. And him and Willie Waddle were obviously great friends during their playing days. Maybe lost touch a little bit following that, but as I say, that shows you the mark of the man and the esteem in which he was held.
Yeah, and Mr. Waddle.
Sorry, and I think.
Sorry,
I was going to say, well, and something that was really good for us as authors in this book was that Willie Waddle's son provided a tribute as well by writing one of the forewords for it, which I think's a really touching thing. That I know the family are really, really happy that what Willie Waddle's son has become part of the book as well, because the Gillick and Waddle families were very close to each other back when the kids were growing up. Yeah,
that's just what I was going to say there. You stole my thunder. I was just saying, that Mr. Waddle's son did one of the forwards for the book, which is great because I think as you say, the families were very close even after they finished. And before, we'll wrap this up very soon. So I know, Dave, you've got your granddaughter.
Shall we put her to bed soon?
Yeah, you'll need to put her to bed. Read her a wee story from your first book, probably one of the.
I'll maybe do Sandy Archibald tonight. Yeah.
No, but he was a great one for his leisure time. He liked his fishing.
Oh, it was one of the. There was a few passions that he had, if you like. Fishing was one that he get hooked on. There's a good pun for you. Yeah, you like that. From a very early age, when he was just a young boy, and he was taking fishing with his uncle and dad, and he done it for the rest of his life. He loved it. And actually, in the months after he had that terrible tragedy with his daughter, one of the things that helped him and his wife recover from it was they started taking holidays up north, up in the Highlands of Scotland, and they especially loved this little place, Dorney, and that's actually where Torry's daughter Molly and his granddaughter Jacqueline, they actually still live there. They still live there to this day. And Dorney's where Torry's wife is buried, because she always maintained that if he had lived longer, they would have moved up there, and he would have been buried there. And his other great passion was obviously greyhound racing. Yeah, he spent a few shillings in various dog tracks across Scotland. Although in later life he actually became an owner of horses and greyhounds, and again the family have got things like greyhound trophies. So they've not just got medals, football medals; they've actually got greyhound medals as well.
Yeah, I mean it's a fascinating story, not just as a Ranger story, but as a life story, like you say. You know, we touched on the tragedies throughout his life. You know, the bits of symmetry of, you know, the fact that he passed away at 55, and I think his parents passed away at 55, and you know,
So
he
did
lost
his two sisters. His
Yep,
two sisters passed away at 55 as well.
he lost a, you know, he lost a daughter at a young age and carried on playing football. But it's an absolutely fascinating book, folks. It's written by my two guests tonight, David Herd and Ian Stewart. This is it here. Torry, the official launch date, I believe, is Monday the 19th of August, but there is a book launch in the Wee Rangers Club on Friday the 16th, which, if you're watching this as a member tonight, is in 2 days' time. If you're watching it on Thursday when it goes out on YouTube or listening back on one of the podcast platforms, it's on Friday. It's, Dave, if I'm right, it's free entry to the Wee Rangers Club, and you're doing the books at a discount.
Yeah, what more can you ask for? 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the Wee Rangers Club, just behind the Broomloan end at Ibrox, in the lounge in there. We've got, obviously, myself and Ian will be talking at it. We've got the quite a few members of the family there, daughter, granddaughter, niece, they're all coming along. And we've also got another great Rangers number 8 Hall of Fame player signed for the juniors, Bobby Russell, who's going to come along as well to help us out. Free entry, and the book's cover price is 25 quid. But if you come along to the launch and you buy a book on the day, you'll get it signed by the 2 authors and Bobby Russell, and you'll get £5 off the cover price. And
if you can't make it along on the day, it's the best 25 quid you will spend, and it's available from all your usual stockists. I mean, as I keep saying on these things, I don't know why I do book reviews and speak to authors, because I don't really read books. I only read the books that like this for occasions like this, because I'm not particularly got the concentration. But it's absolutely brilliant. Once I started reading it, I couldn't put it down. You might be delighted to know it was in Poland with me last week. So, I was sitting reading on a train to Poland. So it's absolutely fascinating, guys. All the very best for the book. I'm sure it's going to be a huge success. I know there's a number of Rangers books out and about just now. There's lots of them getting launched in the next 2 or 3 weeks. They'll all be well worth a read. This one's absolutely fascinating. I mean, even if you're, you know, if you buy it as a Rangers fan, it's a great read for you. But if you've got anybody in your family who's interested in even just the history around about World War II, there's lots of stuff in there that'd be interested in that as well. Just the, you know, of life at that time, if you like, the trials and tribulations of the Gillick family. So I'll not take any more of your Wednesday night, guys. Once again, just to show off the book, because it's an absolutely brilliant cover. I love the cover, superb. It's just called Torry, a book by Ian Stewart and David Herd. So once again, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time, and I'll hopefully speak to you about future books in the future.